Corleen and I have been really looking forward to this gathering together with you here at your assembly. Merle Burkholder is from our congregation, and I understand he was here last year. He's my mentor, and so when David reached out to me wondering if I would take a talk here at ADC, I was meeting with Merle soon after, and Merle helps me keep my life from overcommitting, things like that. And I said, Merle, should I accept this request from ADC? And he's like, yeah, you should. He's like, they'll treat you really well. And he says, you're going to really enjoy it. And he said, there's really good men and women at ADC. And you know what? He was right. We are thoroughly enjoying our time here. Delighted to be here this week with you. This afternoon, we're considering our role as caregivers. You know, as pastors, we have an incredible opportunity. You get to be on the front row in many places, in many ways of what God is doing in people's lives. You're there at some of their most celebratory moments. Weddings, you're there. Baptisms, you're there. You're also there, and when their hearts are just torn open with the deepest grief that they thought imaginable, you're there. And you're bringing Christ in to that hurt and that pain. I remember as a young pastor, I was ordained in my late 20s, and I remember one of the first funeral that I was asked to preach at. A middle-aged man in our congregation, he had gone to bed, and he never woke up. A massive heart attack. And I remember there as that late 20-year-old preparing to preach. And the tears just started to come. And I was feeling a lot of grief in the passing. He was a man, he was from a non-Anabaptist background, a man I really respected and enjoyed. So I was feeling grief. But I was also feeling just the incredible opportunity to speak into the lives, bring Christ into the lives of those who were hurting immensely. And I knew there were going to be a lot of unchurched people there as well. And just the opportunity to preach Christ. It's amazing to be pastors and to have the opportunity to provide soul care. As was mentioned already, I also provide eye care. For the last 18 years, I've been practicing as a private practice optometrist. And you know, it's been an incredible, rewarding career. People really value sight. There are few things that we fear, few disabilities that we fear more than losing sight. And so it's been a rewarding career in helping people to see, maintaining vision. But I would still say that as pastor, soul care has been more rewarding than the profession of eye care. An incredible opportunity to come alongside hurting, needy, lonely, eternal souls and care for their souls. When I'm talking here this afternoon to pastors, wives, I hope you are hearing me talk to you as well, because you have an incredible opportunity, and I'm sure you are already providing soul care in your congregation. My wife has the incredible gift of caring for people. She may not be behind the pulpit on a weekly basis, but she's providing, I would say, more soul care than I am on a week-to-week basis. And so I hope you hear me talking to you here this afternoon as well, women. So as pastors, men and women, how well are you doing in providing soul care in your congregation? A couple questions. So that we're going to try to just, try to understand this. A little introspective here. Do the members in your congregation feel their soul being cared for? You know, we do really well with caring for each other physically. You know, there's a house fire, and we rally, and we provide in tangible ways. Are we providing soul care as well? I remember this was some years ago, a woman in our congregation was just really grappling. She had a traumatic childhood and was really grappling with her story. She was receiving professional counseling, but my wife was walking with her quite a bit as well. And there's one Saturday evening where she reached out to Corleen and said, "I'm really hurting here. I need help. Can we meet this coming week again?" And Corleen messaged back. It was late Saturday night, so absolutely, let's set up a time for this coming week, which is what this lady had been asking for. But my wife thought it'd be good she wanted to do something tangible as well. And so she, that night, pulled out a casserole out of the freezer, put a bouquet of flowers together, and on our way to church Sunday morning, we dropped in at their place, and Corleen just went to the front door. Their daughter met us. They weren't going to church that Sunday. The mom was still in bed, and of course, said, "Just put it on the counter. It's for your mom." Corleen had messaged her as well that she'd be happy to meet. The lady later told my wife, she came down the steps that morning. She was so angry at Cor. She was so angry. She thought Corleen, instead of being willing to once again reach into the messiness of her story, had taken the surface route of simply providing a casserole and some flowers for her. She hadn't yet checked her messages and said that Cor would be happy, delighted to once again meet. You know, it's often easier to touch those tangible things, to provide for those, as opposed to some of the messiness of soul care. Are your members experiencing meaningful connection in the church family? Are individuals being missed in your congregation? Those who might go months without anyone exploring, discovering, and touching their inner life. In our clinic setting, I work in a group practice, and we have several metrics as far as trying to measure, are we providing the care, quality care? And it's hard to measure care, you know? Are you providing the level of care that you could be? And but we do try to track some of this, and one of the ways is we do surveys for patients who are usually the day of or the next day, where they have opportunity to fill in a survey as far as the care that they received, and so gives us a little bit of a window into their perspective. The grouping of offices that I'm part of, the association will sometimes send mystery shoppers to us, mystery patients. Those patients who show up in your chair, and for all I know, they are just here seeking eye care, when actually they're here to critique and to observe me and our team and give eventual feedback as well. So that's another way that we track our care. One of the most meaningful ones for me is when patients refer other patients, friends and family, to our office. That speaks to me to a level of care that they are receiving. But what about in our churches? Do we have metrics that we watch to see whether our members are being cared for? Maybe you do. I'd be interested in knowing. But I think there are some indicators that we could think about. One, does your church family enjoy being together? Do people linger and just enjoy the fellowship and the connection that they have with each other? Last March, we were as a congregation, we were all together for a Saturday working on strategic planning, and Merle was facilitating that, which he does really well at. And we were doing a SWOT analysis as a congregation and listing our strengths, was what we were working on at the time, and people were offering different strengths, and Merle was trying to summarize what people were saying into different categories, and there was one that he was struggling to. There was different input being given, and where does this one fit? And finally he just made a category, said, we like each other. And there was lots of things that were feeding into, we like each other. And as a pastor, I was really grateful for that. When the congregation just enjoys being together, it speaks to a level of care that they're receiving in those interactions. Who's attracted to your church? Is your church a hospital for hurting souls? I'm impressed. I don't know if you've noticed this before, but in Matthew's gospel, there is the story of Jesus chasing out the money collectors in the temple. They're cleansing the temple. And I don't know if you've noticed what the void was after they were chased out, but Matthew writes, then the blind and the lame came to him in the temple, and he healed them. I think that's just a beautiful picture of what our churches should be, of hurting, hungry, lonely souls coming in and finding Jesus and finding healing. Who's attracted to your church? Or is it those who are all put together? Anyone coming into a church brings some baggage with them. Some people have a small carry-on bag, maybe just a personal item. And then there's others, 3 duffel bags and a backpack and a carry-on, and etc. But I think that's a good sign when they're attracted to your church and they stay there, because it speaks about the level of care that they're receiving from your group, from your body. Are people finding healing and belonging? I think we have to be careful here when you start to measure results of healing. I have some patients in my practice who I am seeing on a very regular basis, and I feel I'm providing really good care for them, but all I'm able to do is keep them stable from going blind. I'm simply trying to maintain a level of stability in their life just because their vision is so fragile. And there's people in our pews who you can't measure progress. You're measuring progress over years, not over months. So be careful in thinking about results there. But just some things to think about as far as pastoral care. So we're trying to answer this question, how well are you doing in providing soul care? But where I'm really going here this afternoon is just putting the emphasis in a slightly different place. How well are you doing in providing soul care? How are you doing as you provide soul care? Maybe just listening to me here this afternoon, there was just this growing sense of overwhelm, of maybe guilt, of I'm just not reaching around in my congregation. The list is growing, and there's no end in sight. Maybe I will take a raise of hands here. Who's caught up with everything on their Asana to-do list? Sermons are, drafted for the next 3 months. Your email box is empty, and you're struggling to know what to do with your time. I'm not seeing many hands, because that doesn't really describe probably most of us. Providing soul care is often not an awareness issue, but it's a time and energy issue. Sorry, is it me up here? My shirt, I'll try to bend it upwards a little bit. We already discussed whether we're bivocational or not, but many of us are holding other jobs besides pastoring. We have a spouse. Many of us have a spouse. She's our primary responsibility man as far as providing care for her. Many of us have children as well, who I think none of us, I hope, want to be where we are accused of simply giving them our leftovers to our loved ones. This afternoon, I want to remind us pastors of something. We don't need to provide soul care by ourselves. We can't, and we shouldn't. The church is to care for the church. That's my burden here this afternoon. Sustainable is a word that I've heard a couple times, and I think we need to think in terms of sustainable member care and soul care in our congregations. A church is to be a place where all members are in caring relationships, where people are caring for me as a pastor and I'm caring for them. I asked AI to draw a picture for me, so here it is. Just to give you a sort of a way of thinking here. One model is a pastor trying to reach out to all those who might be in his congregation, versus a pastor who's equipping the church to care for each other. So I think the question really is this one here at the top. How well are we doing in equipping our congregation to care for each other? How well are we doing in equipping our congregation to care? Just a couple verses here, supporting verses. I thought of this verse from 1 Thessalonians here, and I gave just a couple verses ahead of 1 Thessalonians 5:14, just to highlight the fact that I understand here Paul is not writing to leaders, because it's in the previous verses he's saying, recognize those who labor over you, among you, and are over you in the Lord. And so I believe he's talking to the church here in verse 14, where it says, now we exhort you, brethren, talking to the whole church here, warn those who are unruly, comfort the faint-hearted, uphold the weak, be patient with all. Also, Paul in Ephesians 4, speaking about this group here, talking to those who are apostles, prophets, evangelists, pastors, and teachers. What is one of our roles? For the equipping of the saints for the work of ministry, for the edifying of the body of Christ. What are we after? By which each part does its share, causes growth of the body for the edifying of itself in love. We have too often handed over the responsibility of soul care to counseling centers, and I appreciate counseling centers. We're grateful for them, qualified individuals who care. But so often in our members' lives, big crises started really small. Really small. Crises are often simply an accumulation of normal needs. And if that individual, that couple, had been in a caring relationship with others in the church who are checking in, who are speaking into their lives, in many cases, the big crises could have been avoided. Consistent, patient, repetitive, loving care is incredibly powerful. Consistent, patient, repetitive, loving care is powerful. We need churches where every individual is drawn in, experience being deeply known and loved, and learns to reciprocate that to others. When that's not the case in the church, people go looking elsewhere for care. I expect we already have people in our pews who are accessing AI for soul care. I suspect that. Lonely people who are looking for connection, relationship, and have needs in their lives. AI is not the answer to soul care. How do we as pastors cultivate a culture of care in our churches? This afternoon, I want to offer 3 practical ways of equipping our congregations to care for each other. I'm only listing 3 here. There's a long list. And I would love if after this session, and I'll prompt this at the end, where you would explore with others, how are you equipping your congregation to care for each other. So I'm going to simply offer 3 that we have tried to implement in our small congregation at Oasis. First, spiritual friendships. This summer, our family is hoping to visit Newfoundland, Eastern Canada. And I don't know if we're going to see icebergs there. This summer, we're going to be right in the area. I'm guessing we're going to be too late. But if I do see an iceberg, I know that I'm only seeing 10% of it. The other 90% is below the waterline. A different analogy could be the eye. When you look at your spouse's eyes, I hope you're doing that this week, these couple days here. There's opportunity for you to look deeply into each other's eyes without distractions. But you're only seeing about 10% of the eye, right? At the front of the eye there. When I look into your patient's eyes, I'm looking at the macula, the retina, the vitreous, the aqueous humor. I'm seeing the other 90%. We only see a small part when you're looking at the eye. You know, it's relatively straightforward to see the 10% of an iceberg, or the 10% of an eye, or the 10% of each other as well. It takes more effort, more vulnerability, patience to explore and discover and then touch the other 90% of our inner life. Spiritual friendships are those that go below the surface, that go past that first initial 10%. Larry Crabb has said every human being was intended by God to live in relationships where 4 things happen: where they're known and deeply loved, where they're explored. Curiosity. I'm curious about what makes you tick. Where they're discovered, and then where they're touched. Where they're known and deeply loved, where they're explored, where they're discovered, and where they're touched. Is that happening in your churches, in our pews, in our social interactions? We stay around. We have a good culture, I think, of where we fellowship after service. People linger there long times. Are we encouraging our congregations towards really maximizing that time in meaningful spiritual relationships? Or do our conversations tend towards the weather? This week we have reasons to talk, I guess, about the weather. We have reason to talk about the weather. But many times we don't. You'd think that there's huge spiritual implications about what the weather is going to be or what it was, and there's really not. But yet, that's that surface 10% that's easy to go towards. It doesn't take a lot of courage to talk about the weather. It takes courage to go beyond the weather. As leaders, what's our role in encouraging spiritual friendships, church caring for each other? I'm offering, I think, 3 points here. We need to model first. As pastors, living lives of openness, vulnerability, transparency. I think it starts in the pulpit, where we're open with our own struggles, our own inner life. Maybe there's more appropriate places as well, in small groups, but where the members in our congregation are seeing us, all of us, not just surface. Our lives are not perfect. Sharing our struggles is appropriate. Asking good questions of others is another way to model spiritual relationships. I don't know if there's someone who you know of who does really well at going below the surface and asking good questions. But there's one man that I thought of immediately when I was preparing this talk, and that is Brother Alan Roth. Who here knows Brother Alan? I see quite a few hands here. Has anyone been discovered, explored, and touched by Alan? Yeah. I asked Alan this last fall. He was at our place for a meal, and I'm like, Alan, how do you do this? And he was saying, well, he has a list of questions that he keeps gathering, questions to ask people, to explore and discover their inner life. It's not just adults he's touched, This picture was taken in Cambodia 2 years ago. Our family traveled with Alan. We were living in Thailand at the time. He had asked us to come over to Cambodia for a weekend to speak. And this is my 12-year-old. He was 12 at that time with Alan. And Elliot was sharing on a men's canoe trip this last fall. We were just talking about significant people in our lives. This was men from church. And he mentioned Alan. They had only interacted, not that long together. But Alan had touched his life in caring about his inner life. We do need surface conversations. There are times to talk about, your job and the road construction or, the weather at times. But don't miss those opportunities to go below the surface, to listen for hints where, hey, that person is really open to thinking and talking more about what's going on inside. So I encourage you to have questions that you have in your mind that you can go towards. I thought about having you all ask each other a question here today that go below the surface, but then I'm like, we're going to be here for 50 minutes while everyone is trying to really answer that question. But I think it's good for you to be thinking of ways in which you can ask those in your congregation questions that push, not probing questions that are inappropriate, but questions that get them, explore their inner life. One of the ones that my go-to is just asking those, like, what's big in your life right now? We all have something that's big in our life, that's consuming our attention, our thoughts, our fears. Asking what's been life-giving for you lately? What are you finding really joyful in life right now? Or what are you finding really perplexing in life? What's hard right now for you in life? That one might be a little bit more probing that may or may not be appropriate, but just giving those opportunities for people to go a little deeper in the friendship. We could have a whole session on listening then. Listening is hugely important, not just asking the questions. Second, we need to cast vision for a caring congregation. It is really easy to just have surface relationships. And so I think as pastors, we can cast a vision for where we are caring for each other. And in our congregation, sometimes we will simply just say, as the service comes to an end, all right, this is a great opportunity for you to discuss what impacted you in the sermon here this morning. What are you going to take with you? To ask each other those questions, to push the congregation to asking each other those questions, to just take that friendship down a little deeper below the water level. In our congregation, we also have a share time at the end of the sermon where it is the opportunity to share what impacted you about the sermon, also what's big in your life right now, and that also helps to facilitate moving from that into dismissal of where we are talking and listening to each other. Encourage your congregation to be known in sharing prayer requests with you that you can verbalize to the congregation, or if they could verbalize themselves, but also their joys and the things they're celebrating in life. I remember one father in our share time simply mentioned to the congregation that his 4-year-old that week had learned how to ride bike, and it was a big deal for her. And that 4-year-old was celebrated at the end of that service simply because she was known in the congregation on that one point. My context here is a small church. For you who are in larger churches, you'll have to be more creative probably in some of these areas. I do find that people come to a small church thinking that, hoping to be part of a really close and caring fellowship. But it's a mistake to assume that just because a church is small, it's a warm and caring community. It's a mistake to assume that. It takes intentionality from us as leaders in creating that sort of culture and atmosphere. And the third one there, we need to cultivate space for such caring interactions. We're talking here spiritual friendships. I do think 100 years ago, there was a lot more opportunity for life-on-life conversations to happen. Sharing the same equipment in a farming community, maybe having people living in proximity. We have people in our pews who live 2 hours apart from each other. It's hard to do life on life with them and to know each other, what's big in your life, unless we are giving space for that in our congregation to spend time together. And so I know you're already doing this, fellowship meals where people can linger over food and get to know each other, and hopefully go below that first 10% into the inner spiritual friendship. Work projects. Our congregation doesn't do sewing circle, but I know some places do that. One thing that has been significant in our congregation is we have monthly church socials. Everyone, all ages, are invited. We might be going biking somewhere. We might go hiking. We might be a talent show. Might be camping together. That's an annual event. I remember one man who had just recently been attending our congregation came after we had finished a weekend of camping together in July. And he came to me, he said, there's a lot more church that happened here this weekend than what normally happens on a Sunday morning. And he was right. Spiritual friendships, opportunity to build that. So as leaders, we can be the catalyst in helping caring relationships within the congregation. The next one is really spiritual friendships that are a little bit more organized. And in our congregation, we call them tiny groups. Tiny groups, intentional spiritual friendships. This was started about 10 years ago in our congregation by the ladies had a day seminar, and it's on soul care. And one of the ladies came up to my wife afterwards saying, what do you think about us organizing just some small groups, very grassroots level, small groups of intentional spiritual friendships? And so it started at that point and has continued to this day. Us men took a bit to get caught up, but we now have tiny groups as well in our congregation. And they're very simple, 3 to 4 in a group. They're segregated, so the men and women have separate tiny groups. And they are intentionally intergenerational, old and the young, together. We don't go too young. They need to be able to drive. So that is that's kind of the starting point for our tiny groups. And they meet once a month, and it is usually 1.5 to 2 hours long. And the structure is very simple. Every person has 20 minutes to bring to the table, to the group, whatever they want to talk about, whatever is big in their life, whatever is perplexing them right at that point in time. And they simply have that time to talk to the group. The group offers listening, but little else. At the last 10 minutes then is intended for questions, maybe some feedback, and a time of prayer, and it moves on to the next individual. And that's tiny groups. It's been intentionally, we have pushed where it's led by the laity in our congregation, the organization. On an annual basis, they reorganize. Anyone who wants to, it's just a simple email that out saying we're reorganizing if you want to be a part. Some people opt in and out depending on what their life situation is as far as timing. But one of the blessings, I would say, in leadership not being involved in this is that, when leaders are proposing something, there's going to be people who will sign up just because, the leader said I should, as opposed to, this is really something that I want. And for small groups to really work, it needs to be people who really want to be there. And so that has been one of the things that it's just been a huge blessing. On a Sunday morning when I'm sitting or standing behind the pulpit and looking out over the congregation, I know there's people there who are hurting, who are experiencing hard things in their life. And I know I'm not going to reach around to meeting all, exploring and discovering what's going on. But it's so encouraging to know that there's a small group of people that are around that individual and are supporting them on a monthly basis. So that's just one of the things that we have implemented as leaders. I think it's important for us to be a part of something like this. I think we have to work really hard, men, to not be on pedestals. Where we are open with the congregation, they see not just the Sunday part of us, but what's big in our lives as well. So tiny groups have been a huge blessing in our congregation. There are times when a tiny group is too big. When, even though we, stress confidentiality and trust, it still feels too big to be a part of something like this. And sometimes the format just doesn't work. So, for example, couples mentoring, older couples mentoring younger couples. It can be powerful. I know we had a couple that came to us for premarital counseling, and it became clear very soon that their relationship was incredibly rocky. Conflict, difficulty resolving conflict. We were exploring very seriously, pushing the wedding date out because it was coming on very soon. And they were wanting to proceed. They were committed to each other, committed to proceeding. And so we brought in an older couple from the congregation and said, this couple's going to need support, mentorship. And it started before they were married, and that they have continued to meet regularly with that couple. And I don't know for sure, but I do think that if that marriage had not received that sort of level of care, within a few years, they would have been sitting in a counselor's office with what would seem like irreconcilable differences and little energy or desire to move towards each other. So couple mentoring can be really powerful. Like I said, maybe one-on-one is better. I think of some individuals who've had a traumatic, maybe abusive history, and it's all I can open myself up to is one other person. So maybe then mentorship is a better setting. I'm part of a tiny group, but I'm also have a mentor. I have Merle Burkholder lives 3 minutes from my place, and there's a Tim Hortons right halfway in between us, so it's perfect for him as a mentor where we can meet there on a regular basis. But I just think it's really important in my life to be open to someone else about my inner life in ways that I might not even open up fully in a tiny group. Simply, maybe it's congregational things that are sensitive that I have to be careful about what I would share, but have confidence in sharing with one other person. Mentoring can be informal, just dropping in on a regular or connecting on a semi-regular basis, nothing formal. My wife grew up in a non-Anabaptist background home, and she started coming to the Mennonite Church in her youth, and she would regularly just drop in on some of the homes of young moms in the congregation, help them out, do jobs around there, but she was probably not formally looking for it, and they didn't probably recognize what they were doing, but they were mentoring her in really significant ways, but it was very informal. But there's also times for formal arrangements where we have set times and time lengths and what we plan to cover, things like that as well. And I encourage you in your congregation, you have people who are really good at mentoring. I know you do. And I encourage you to identify them and maybe, direct needs toward them, but also where you can encourage them. They can be carrying a really heavy load, and supporting you as pastors. Encourage those who are helping you out, who are providing care in mentoring, and then equipping them. Maybe it's a matter of sending them out for further training, maybe sending them to Life Ministries for Core 1 or something of that nature as well. as leaders, I'm just going to talk here a little bit to us men. It probably extends to women as well, but I'm thinking here especially of us men. I think it's really important that we have a mentor, a trusted relationship where any question is a fair question. Someone who has a pulse on your life. Maybe it's someone in the church, maybe it's someone outside of the church, but I do think it needs to be someone who's seeing you on a regular basis, someone who knows you. We probably all know someone who was a leader and fell. Maybe it was someone, that you saw from a distance. Maybe it was someone pretty close to you. Leaders, we're vulnerable. If you are the head of your company, if you're the head of your home, and if you're a lead pastor, you're vulnerable. There's something that we can start thinking, well, we're kind of above the rules. We can start giving ourselves permission to cross over boundaries. This maybe doesn't apply to me. Nobody gets out of bed in the morning and thinks, today I'm going to go and ruin my ministry. I'm going to ruin my business. I'm going to ruin my family, my marriage. People don't get out of bed and think like that. But they get out of bed saying, I'm going to give myself permission to cross over a boundary that I shouldn't be crossing. 2 weeks ago, as I was preparing for this talk, I read the incredibly disheartening news of Philip Yancey. Married for 55 years, 76 years of age, 15 million books sold, and for 8 years, secretly having an extramarital affair with another married woman. Men, this has to stop. It has to stop. And we need to live lives as leaders of openness, vulnerability, and transparency. We need, when our lives are starting to take a turn that it should not, we need to have people who will call us out, who know us well enough and will call us out. We should be modeling and encouraging ourselves mentorship, being open to that, where we have a mentor and where we are mentoring others. Our churches should be places of mutual care. That includes us as leaders giving and receiving care. I was reminded of this past August. Our family visited Zion National Park, and we hiked the Narrows. Has anyone here been at Zion National Park and hiked the Narrows? A couple of you? That's a good time. The Narrows in Zion, by the way, U.S. Southwest is pretty, some pretty amazing places there. Our family decided to hike the Narrows. The Narrows is a slot canyon in Zion National Park, and one of the unique things about this hike is most of the time you're walking in a river because it's a slot canyon and there's water flowing. And so that also makes it dangerous because your footing is unstable. There's slippery rocks. Sometimes the water was up to here. Sometimes it was just, very, very shallow. But still, there's rocks. And so I had done some research and found that, you're supposed to rent these boots, get these special socks, and have at least one sturdy walking stick, maybe two. Or else you're at risk of twisting your ankle, twisting your knees, and I read people who had attempted this, and there were horror stories out there, and well, that's all fine, except these things cost money, and I have 4 children, and my wife and I were all going to hike, and I was like, I don't know, $30 for us each to rent boots for a couple hours, and we can do this without. And I had read somewhere else that, if you get there early in the morning, people have left walking sticks there from the night before, and so you just can grab one of those and you'll go. And that sounded like a good idea. And so we got there, and we wanted to beat the crowd, so we got the first shuttle in. But the problem is there weren't many walking sticks there, and there were a few of these crooked something. And anyway, I think four of us found a walking stick, but there were 6 of us. So my daughter and I, Devora, she's my baby, and oops. Oh, it's missing the last page, and that's okay. You would have seen a picture of Devora and I. We decided she was feeling vulnerable. She's a little, not very tall, thin little girl, and she was feeling vulnerable walking through this river. And so we decided we're going to hold each other's hands, and we're going to walk this together without a walking stick. Everyone else had a walking stick. And so we started out, and the rocks were slippery. But we hiked in and we hiked out. It was about a 5-hour hike that we did there in the Narrows. And you know what? We got out, and Devora's like, I didn't fall at all. And she didn't. She was holding my hand, and there was times when she had teetered over, and I secured her, and she did not fall into the water. But what was more surprising to me was how many times I was teetering on rocks, I was slipping off, and I was holding my little 8-year-old daughter's hands, and it was her that kept me from falling into the water. It was her that kept me from twisting and landing in the water. It was just enough to restabilize me and pull me back. We need each other in our churches. We need each other. Make sure you are living in open, vulnerable relationships with your people. Let others hold your hands. You're leaders. You're the strong ones. But you need people holding your hands as well. Let me remind you again, pastoring is an incredible opportunity to care. And also, I hope you're hearing this afternoon an opportunity to equip your congregation to care for each other. We touched on 3 things: spiritual friendships, tiny groups, mentoring. These are simply from my own experience. But you have things that you're doing in your congregation as well, equipping your congregation to care. And that was my final challenge, is over the break here that we're about to enter, talk to each other learn from each other. How are you? How is your congregation caring for each other? There we are in the Narrows there. How is your congregation intentionally caring for each other? Let's pray. Lord, would you encourage these men and women as they provide soul care in their congregation? Lord, would you encourage them as they equip their congregation to care for each other? And Lord, may these men and women live lives of openness, transparency, vulnerability, and live lives of integrity and wholeness. And I pray this in Christ. Amen.